This lecture is on general skills for writing, and I'm going to give you some advice for critical writing. First, let's cover what the need is here. So, writing is an important skill that everybody basically needs to learn, um, because good writing is a kind of art form. And while some people will ultimately be able to master the art of writing, the rest of us at least can aim to get better at it. It's often ideal to learn to write, to get your thoughts across clearly and concisely. And that's really what a good portion of this class is for. Rather than, say, creative writing, this class is at least partially aimed at the idea of trying to construct clear, concise writing that just gets a point across. Now, I'm not going to be covering in this little lecture grammar, spelling, or punctuation, as you should have a relatively good grasp on those already. If you are struggling with grammar, spelling, and punctuation, you should use the Writing Center or use general tools available to you through the computer, through Microsoft Word, whatever. But what will be covered here will be steps about the writing process itself, certain skills that you should have when writing, the structure and purpose of sentences and paragraphs, and some general writing guidelines and suggestions. And to start, I will make you aware of a few terrible analogies that will be appealed to here. The first is the building blocks analogy. When it comes to writing, you should, in a sense, think of writing as having a bunch of building blocks or Legos or something like that, all spread out in front of you. You've got lots of different pieces that have to be fit together in different ways. There's lots of ways to fit the pieces together, and there are better and worse ways to fit the pieces together to fulfill the purpose of the ultimate writing piece, the piece of writing. And so the analogy here is supposed to be, you've got these building blocks and you're trying to build a building block city. And there's lots of ways to do that, but certain ways are better than others. Another terrible analogy is sort of architecture first, or like make a map of what you're going to do. Make an outline, right? Nobody builds a building without drawing it out first, right? You have to have a plan in order to execute what you're going to do. And so I, highly will suggest that you make an outline whenever you write anything. And then finally, the last terrible analogy here is that of herding cats. Writing is, it's said, is like herding cats. If you've ever tried to herd cats, it's a pretty difficult thing to do. They all run in different directions. It's really hard to get them into the same, area and keep them, going straight. The idea here is that writing is, in a sense, like herding cats, because your readership is going to simply misunderstand you, misunderstand whatever you've written, no matter what you do. And the best thing that you can do when you're writing is try your hardest to be as clear as possible so that it's extremely difficult for your readership to misunderstand you. There's, for any one sentence, there's probably 2 or 3 different ways to read it, to understand it. Depending on intonation or what people think certain words mean, all kinds of things. And just as herding cats is difficult, it's very difficult to write in such a way that it's so clear to your reader exactly what you mean that they will understand you every time. But that is a goal to have while writing. All right, to start off talking about the writing process itself. The first thing that you're going to do, of course, is start in on a rough draft. A rough draft should be a mess. It should be a way for you to get all of your ideas out there, and it should be something that you plan to clean up later. Write down kind of just start. I mean, like, you just start. If you have a project, you just start, you make lists, you slowly build an outline, you give general ideas to yourself about how the beginning should go. You might start writing sections because you might find yourself, like, all of a sudden, it takes hold. You're like, oh, I know how I need to write this part, and you'll just sort of have a bunch of messy bits and pieces here and there. This part of the process should take maybe 25 to 35% of the time of your writing. You might be surprised by my saying that. A lot of people just write their rough draft and then like turn it in. That's a terrible idea. Your rough draft should be the sort of just the basis for your writing. It shouldn't be the finished product at all. Then you should start editing and proofreading. Editing and proofreading involves reading over your writing and stopping every time something seems off or confusing or problematic. You should be asking yourself every time you read a sentence whether or not that sentence says exactly what you want it to say, whether or not that sentence is as clear as it should be, is going to be interpreted exactly how you want it to be interpreted by your readership. And then you should try to fix things so that they sound better, so that they flow better in the way that you want them to be. This can happen in lots of different ways. Sometimes you have to throw things out. Sometimes you have to add things in. Editing and proofreading should take probably about 50+% of the time of your entire project. This, like, really spending a lot of time going over and over the same thing, making it better and better, is how the writing process really goes. The rough draft is just get everything out there. The editing process is the most important part. Polishing is what happens once you've kind of got everything written, everything structured in the right kind of way. You're pretty sure you've got something that's substantive and worthy of turning in, but you want to make sure that you haven't, screwed anything up while doing the editing process. You read back through, you make sure that everything is consistent, that you use the consistent terminology. You're not using different words for the same thing throughout the paper. You haven't like screwed up sentence structure through editing. You just kind of go through it, with a fine-tooth comb and make sure everything is ready to go. And then you end up with your final draft. You now have your completed work and you can turn it in. One of the first things that you're going to do when you start writing a rough draft is to build an outline. An outline should sort of chart these three main points, right? The outline should, answer the question, what are you doing, right? What do you need to do? What is the writing prompt? What is the goal for your writing here? You need to answer that question and think about it, and that should lead you to the point, right? The point of your writing is trying to figure out how to achieve the goal of your writing. So once you have a goal in mind, once you have the point, it's basically like, something along the lines of your thesis statement, maybe, right? Is how you might think of it. Once you have the goal or the point, then you should be able to, using that, think about what you need to do to achieve that goal or point. And from there, you can identify the building blocks, the different parts of what you're going to need to add up to the whole to achieve the goal. So once you sort of think about what you're doing, you can identify a goal. Then with the goal, you can try and identify what you need to achieve that goal. And then you can identify the building blocks, the parts that are going to need to be in place in order to get to the finish line. A basic example here, using the things that we're going to be talking about, like the JFK assassination. So what am I doing? The goal here. I'm trying to explain the conspiracy theory. I'm going to give an argument for that theory, and I'm going to criticize the flaws in the argument. That's the basic outline asked for by the prompt. The point, the needs. What do I need in this case? I need info on the theory itself. I need an argument for the conclusion of the theory. I need evidence to back up the premises for that argument, and then I need to find flaws in the argument or premises in order to achieve the previous goals. And then using, okay, and now I can move on to the building blocks. Well, okay, so what do I need? I need an explanation of the theory. That's one whole thing that I need to write. So now I've got that sort of sectioned off. Two, I need a structured argument for the theory itself, or for the main point of the theory. That's a whole other thing to section off. And then three, I need criticisms of the premises or of the evidence for the premises of that argument. Now, as you can hopefully see, these three things are structured in a way that each one builds on the other. You can't give an argument for a theory without an explanation of what the theory is to begin with. So you have to start off with the conspiracy theory, explaining what the conspiracy theory is, and then you can start to give an argument based on premises for the conclusion of that conspiracy theory. And then once you have an argument in place, you can then try and come up with criticisms of the premises of that argument, or criticisms of the evidence on which that argument is based. But you can't give those criticisms of the argument without having the argument, right? If you just give criticisms of the theory, well, then you're not criticizing the argument, and that's not what's asked for in the prompt, and so you're doing it wrong. So here, what you need to do is you need to lay out this sort of structure in this outline that gives you basic, clear idea of what steps you need to take in order to accomplish this whole project. Now, there are a number of things that you need to work on while you are undertaking the writing of any writing assignment, really, but this one in particular. So the first is clarity. When you're writing, you should try to make your writing as clear as possible. Avoid jargon where common words and phrases will do. Say things in the most straightforward way. Don't try to get super fancy with your grammar, or I don't know, just if you feel like you're saying something in a funny way, then try to avoid it. Don't speak like Yoda, right? Don't overthink it. Also, don't overthink your explanations. Try to very clear, try to make things clear and straightforward. Don't make them complicated when they don't need to be complicated. Or if it seems like they're overly complicated, go back to the drawing board and try to make them simpler. And then there's no need to say the same thing twice. So here's this example that I've got here. The JFK assassination happened in the 1960s. It was a significant event that shocked everyone. JFK was a highly popular president, and he got shot while riding in his car during a parade. There were conspiracy theories and speculation, with people suggesting it was a bigger plot than just one person. Now that sentence right there, very unclear, right? There were conspiracy theories and speculation. Come on, give me what the conspiracy theory was. Be a little bit more clear. Don't just be vague about what's going on here, and try to say it in a better way. That just sounds terrible. The Warren Commission conducted an investigation to determine what happened. Sure, okay, that's one way of saying it, but why use the phrase conducted an investigation when you could just say the word investigated? However, there is still much uncertainty and various theories. It remains a significant historical event that people still discuss today. You already said that at the beginning. Why do you need to say that it's a significant event twice? So this is a classic example of some writing that needs some work to clear it up and to get rid of certain redundancies. Another thing to work on is accuracy. Accuracy in writing is basically trying to say things that are true, and when you're not sure whether or not something's true, either go look it up or hedge, right? Don't say that it's true when you're not sure that it's true. So try to only say things that are true. Hedging is basically like using the word allegedly, or using the word, discussing what people believe rather than making a claim. Oftentimes, if you overcommit, then you're trying to make some claim and say that something is true when you might not know that it's true, or it might not actually be true. And then it's good, I think, to distinguish between opinions, especially your opinions, beliefs, and evidence and facts. When different people have opinions, or certain beliefs that they have are based on faith, maybe it's not the case that they are true. It's not the case that we need to worry about what's true for you, it's true for them, right? Those are things that have to do with evidence, have to do with opinions, not with evidence and when with facts. So examples here. Instead of the sentence, the Warren Commission was a tool used by the CIA to cover up their misdeeds, you might say something more along the lines of like, the conspiracy theorists alleged that the Warren Commission was used by the CIA to avoid being blamed for JFK's death, right? So here the idea is like, you don't want to be speaking necessarily in the voice of the conspiracy theorist, claiming things left and right that they would claim, but you can talk in a way that discusses what the conspiracy theorists themselves actually think. Similarly, don't appeal to your own opinion, right? So either make a statement and back it up, or avoid making that statement altogether, right? So if you're just going to say something like, in my opinion, I think this, that, and the other thing. No, don't say that. Just if it's something that you can back up, say this, that, and the other thing, right? Say exactly what it is that you were going to say. And if it's not something that you can back up, then you should probably avoid saying it, or you should discuss it in a different light as though it's something that some people believe, or some kind of theory that's in the offing, but it's not something that's necessarily true or that has a good reason behind believing it. Being concise, concision, is a virtue of good writing. You don't need to use more words when fewer will do. So this is what we might call Occam's razor of writing, is say only what is necessary. Don't use more words than you need to. Write plainly. Jargon is usually misused or poorly understood by your reader, and so only really ever use big vocab words when it makes your writing clearer or better in some way. Otherwise, just try to avoid it. I mean, this is really a big part of the writing project, because you're going to start off in your rough draft and with an outline, just with like a big mess of ideas, right? You got a bunch of different ideas, but really part of the whole point of doing a writing project is taking the big mess of ideas that you have and figuring out how to pare it down so that you just say exactly what you're trying to say, exactly what you need to say in that case. It's possible, like generally you see students go in a few different ways when it comes to the writing process. They start off not knowing how to find enough stuff to write about. But then once they get good enough at figuring out how to do a little bit of research here and there, they find a wealth of information, and then they overwrite. They end up having way too much stuff to write down, way too much stuff to say. And that's just as problematic as not having enough to say. Once you have too much information, a lot of that information is extraneous and unnecessary for getting your main point across. So you don't need all of that, and it's your job to figure out which parts can get tossed out without harming the overall whole point of what you're doing. So concision is really an important thing. You can find whole sections of your paper that might not be necessary, but in particular, oftentimes it's just the ways that certain sentences are stated, or words, making a long sentence into a shorter one. So here's an example of an overly wordy sentence and a concise sentence that basically say the same thing. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which occurred on November 22nd, 1963, during a motorcade in Dallas, Texas, remains a significant historical event that has generated numerous conspiracy theories due to the enigmatic circumstances surrounding the incident. Oof, what a wordy sentence. The concise version. JFK's assassination on November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, continues to captivate due to its mysterious circumstances and resulting conspiracy theories. Here also I'd like to point out just the word enigmatic and the word mysterious. They basically mean the same thing, but enigmatic is a word that I would suggest fewer people will understand right off the bat. And so that trips your readership up. It's easier to just use the word mysterious most of the time. And it's just a better way to write when you're being clear for your audience. There should be a clear-cut structure and flow to your writing. You need to give each paragraph in your writing a purpose. You need to use paragraphs. I do not want to see big walls of text. Each paragraph should make one general larger point in your overall paper. In a way, every point that you write down in a outline should have its own paragraph. Sometimes, there might be little sub points that need to be made within a paragraph, but really each point in an outline should be its own paragraph. Each sentence within that paragraph should go some way towards making the point of the paragraph. And then all paragraphs should, in the end, add up and be ordered accordingly to make the whole point of the paper, right? You can kind of think of that as a building block analogy. The flow of your paper should have something to do with its readability, enjoyability to read, right? Whether or not everything goes together, whether or not everything sounds okay. Paragraphs and sentences should flow into one another. It's sometimes useful to use transitions from sentence to sentence or topic to topic. And to check your flow, you should read your writing out loud to yourself. In fact, you should just do that in general and ask yourself whether or not the sentences that you're reading are true and whether or not the sentences that you're reading are saying exactly what you want them to say. But then also on top of it, you should be reading them out loud to yourself to see if the sentences go well together and sound okay to read together. If you run out of breath while reading a sentence, then that sentence is a bad sentence, right? There should be some sort of like cadence to your writing that allows for easy enough reading. Sentences themselves, on the other hand, should be a little bit different than, paragraphs. A sentence, the purpose of a sentence should be to have, express one complete thought. Right? So there should be something like a subject and a predicate. You shouldn't be using rhetorical questions. Anytime you use a rhetorical question, basically you can just flip that into a clear statement that you need to be making. When it comes to sentences, you can be consistent without being boring. Sentences don't need to be short and choppy, but they also shouldn't be long run-ons either. It's possible to have lots of sentences without having them all be exactly the same subject-predicate structure. Sometimes you can take on what's called active voice or the passive voice in different contexts. And then word choice is key. I highly suggest that you use a thesaurus or a dictionary just to make sure that you're using certain words correctly. If you're not sure when you're using a certain word, if you're not sure whether or not you're using it correctly, make sure to look it up. And if you really aren't sure still, then I would suggest leaving that word out. If you misuse a word, it makes your writing less clear. And so if you're not sure how to use the word, leave it out and try and come up with another way to write the same thing. Paragraphs themselves should probably be about 4 to 8 sentences, right? And then they should basically take on larger thoughts or larger sections of the paper. So each sentence should be a complete thought, and then a paragraph should be sort of a larger thought where all the sentences add up to make that big point. Paragraphs should build on each other, and they should respond to previous signposts. The signposts I'll talk about when I discuss the introduction. The structure of a paragraph should flow together, of course, and then transitions between paragraphs should flow together as well. Here is an example. The magic bullet theory is a cornerstone of the official account of JFK's assassination that has been heavily debated and criticized over the years. According to the theory, a single bullet passed through Kennedy's upper back, then exited through his throat, proceeding to injure Governor Connally in multiple locations before coming to a stop. Critics of the theory argue that it relies on a series of implausible events and trajectories that defy the laws of physics. The sudden changes in direction and angle required for the bullet's path raise significant doubts about its plausibility. Furthermore, skepticism surrounding the magic bullet theory is amplified by the lack of concrete physical evidence to support its supposed trajectory. Despite its pivotal role in the Warren Commission's conclusions, the bullet's alleged path through both Kennedy and Connally remains a subject of skepticism. This is because there is an absence of definitive ballistics evidence, and the conflicting medical testimonies cast doubt on the accuracy and reliability of the magic bullet theory, leading to a continued discourse and exploration of alternative explanations surrounding the tragic event. These paragraphs go pretty well together. They flow from one to the other. The first lays out a kind of part of a theory, a reason why people think that the magic bullet theory was problematic. And then the furthermore at the beginning of the second paragraph just tells you, hey, I'm going to say a whole nother thing about this that gives us more evidence for it, or another thing another reason to think that this is that it's justified to be skeptical about these conclusions. These sentences are pretty well put together, and they sound relatively nice to read. They don't trip you up while you're reading them. Some of the wordiness in this maybe could be, this maybe could be a little bit more concise, and there are a few words here that maybe could be changed to make it a little bit more easy for people to understand. But I think this is a pretty good paragraph or two. Some general paper guidelines on what you should do and shouldn't do. Well, so when it comes to writing a paper of any real sort, right, the introduction of the paper should be basically a summary of the paper with signposts. A way of thinking about it is that in the intro, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, right? So you, at the beginning of your paper, you should kind of lay out a basic summary. Then in the body, you should tell them, right? So it's tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. In the body, you tell them. You follow through on what you said you were going to say in the intro, and you alert reader to the fulfillment of the signposts. The signposts in the intro are when you say, like, hey, I'm going to make this point. And then in the body, you say, hey, look, I'm making the point that I already like I already mentioned, right? And then when you make that point, you have fulfilled the signpost. Conclusion, tell them what you're gonna tell them what you told them. Basically, the end should be sort of the reverse of the intro. You can kind of summarize the main points that you made throughout the paper, explain what it is that you showed in the paper, and what your conclusions are and why they are supported. Some things that you shouldn't do in your intro is start too broadly. I know everyone in high school was taught for some reason to start very, very generally at the introduction of their paper, but that's not actually a good way to write. Definitely avoid being too general at the very beginning of your paper. The number of times that I see people say things like, since the dawn of time, people have been worried about conspiracy theory. No, I don't want that, right? That is silly. No, people have not been worried about conspiracy theory since the dawn of time. Like, people, it's just frustrating. What you should do is just jump right in to the thing you're talking about, right? And in this kind of case, in the introduction, you're just gonna say something about, like, in the JFK assassination case, right? You're just gonna say something about the JFK assassination being a conspiracy theory. Like, you don't need to talk about what everyone once thought, right? In this sort of extremely general way. Totally silly and unnecessary. What you should do in your intro is explain what the paper is going to be about, lay out the topics in the order that you're going to be presenting them. It's all right to sort of not give everything away in the intro, right? You can kind of save that for the conclusion, where you say, what you really did say. In the intro, you can be sort of leading. You can try and, put the carrot on the end of the stick, get the person to be interested enough in continuing to read on in your paper. You can give them some juiciness, be like, hey, by the end of this, I'm going to show you this thing, and doesn't that sound cool? Then in the body, you do kind of what you got to do. You follow your outline. You're going to, with the structure of the paper as it's been laid out in the prompt, you need to hit all of the main points that the prompt asks you to hit. Sometimes it's easier to write the body of a paper first before you write the introduction even. Because then you can go back once you've written the body and sort of use your body to summarize in the intro, like use it as like a sort of lead in, right? So once you've if you've got your outline and you're like, okay, well, at least I know how to write. Like I need to write a section that explains the conspiracy theory, then I need to write a section that's an argument for the conspiracy theory, and then I need to write a critical section. Well, if you write all three of those, then maybe you can go back afterwards and write the intro that sort of introduces each of the sections as they're going to come. And then you're going to do the same thing with the conclusion. When it comes to the conclusion, try not to say the same exact thing that you said in your intro. The conclusion should have some sense of finality to it. It should kind of complete the journey through the ideas that you've laid out. It should recapitulate, explaining in very basic terms just what it is that was shown in your paper. Yeah, so what you should be doing is trying to summarize the main points. Don't feel like you have to be restricted to one paragraph in a conclusion. It can be a few paragraphs touching on everything that was said. Same thing with the introduction. It doesn't have to be one paragraph. And unlike everyone said in high school, your thesis statement does not need to be the last sentence of the first paragraph. The thesis statement can be buried in there. It's the thesis statement is basically just the point of everything that you're writing, and in a sense, the point of everything that you're writing in this context is just following the prompt, right? Explaining the conspiracy theory, laying out an argument for the conspiracy theory, and criticizing that argument, which ultimately is what you're going to be doing, and that's, if you're laying that out as sort of the summary and the intro of what's going to happen in the paper, then that's basically your thesis statement. And then each main section of the paper should be at least touched on in the conclusion to remind the reader of how we got to where we are in the end. Most importantly, have fun while writing. Writing can really be hard, but once it gets difficult, you should be taking breaks. It's very, very much more useful and helpful to start the writing process early and get the stuff out there that you want to get out there. And then when you hit writer's block or feel like you're banging your head against your desk or your computer, take a break and come back to it. It's much more helpful, given that editing is most of the work that you should be doing in this context. Like, get all your information out there, start to structure it, build an outline, leave it. Come back to it and think through it all again. You're going to have fresh ideas. You're going to have new things that you want to say. You're going to realize that some of the stuff that you had written out before was garbage. And that's fine. That's exactly how this is all supposed to go. I highly recommend don't delete old stuff when you come back to it and you're like, oh, this is garbage. Don't delete it. Just cut it and paste it somewhere else in another document that's a big messy document, because you might actually come back and be like, oh, actually, you know what? That was a good idea. Now I understand why I was thinking that before. But yeah, I mean, the basic idea is you're going to start with a big mess of blocks, a big mess of ideas, a big mess of things that you've read about, thought about a little bit here and there. You're going to have some sort of architectural structure that you're going to follow. You're going to build out yourself, and then you're going to end up with a block city that hopefully looks like a well-functioning block city, a good Lego castle of a written piece of work. And, also don't worry about missing the mark, right? The first time. The whole point of this kind of class and of this kind of assignment is to help you get better at doing this. So take chances, strike out there. If you've got an idea and you think something's interesting and worth saying in a certain way or trying out a certain thing, do it and maybe highlight it. Let me know if you're interested in my comments on it and whether or not it worked or didn't. And we'll just go from there. All right, good luck.